Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Reverend Steve Andrews. Today let us read from Judges chapter 12. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zephon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire." And Jephthah said to them, "I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hand. And when I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and Yahweh gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they said, "You are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh." And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead said to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When he said, "No," they said to him, "Then say Shibboleth." And he said, "Sibboleth," for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died, and was buried in his city in Gilead. After him Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons, and 30 daughters he gave in marriage outside his clan, and 30 daughters he brought in from outside for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died, and was buried at Bethlehem. After him Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died, and was buried at Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. After him Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons, who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite died, and was buried at Pirathon in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. This is the word of the Lord. So today we finish the account of Jephthah, the 8th judge over Israel, the 5th of the major judges, and then we see 3 of the minor judges over the land. So let's look at Jephthah first. Similar, very much so, to his dad, to Gideon, his father. The Ephraimites come out after the battle's already done, and they accuse him and wonder why he did not invite them to go along with him. Gideon's response to them was a little bit more crafty. Gideon basically argued that what they had gotten, what they were able to plunder from taking over the princes, right, the princes of Midian, was better than the plunder that Gideon himself had received. And they seemed to have been contented by that. So it was really a coveting, a desire for the spoils of war, and thinking that they had missed out on such an opportunity to enrich themselves. And so now they come against Jephthah for a very similar reason. And so you can ask your children here, why are they so angry at Jephthah? And see if your kids can pick up on that idea that they're angry because of their coveting. They're missing the spoils, the plunders of war. They didn't really want to fight for it either. They just want the stuff. And that's a trouble, right? That's part of the sinful nature there. So they even threatened to burn down Jephthah in his own house. Now, Zephon, I didn't mention before, Zephon, they have crossed. So they crossed over the Jordan River because Jephthah and the Gileadites live in Gilead, which is east of the Jordan River, which is why they had the fight with the Ammonites to begin with. Ammon wanted that land back on the eastern side of the Jordan. And so Jephthah actually says here that he did call them. We don't get a response from Ephraim saying that's not true. So most likely, then it looks like Jephthah actually did call Ephraim if they wanted to go into battle, and there was no response, and so it just didn't get recorded for us in the previous chapter. "I called you, you did not save me from their hand." Verse 3 is odd, and it's a point worth discussing as a family. "I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and Yahweh gave them into my hand." Do you see the problem with that sentence? This is one of those moments where two statements have been declared to be true by Jephthah, but they can't both be true. See if you can identify what those two statements are. And which is the truth? I took my life in my hand, or Yahweh gave them into my hand? If Yahweh gave them into your hand, then you didn't take your life in your hand. Your life was never in danger. I mean, that's what that phrase means. He took a risk. He didn't take any risk. God cared for him, right? Or if God did not give them into his hand, then he did take his life into his own hand. That's the distinction. That's the difference there. Jephthah's missing out on. Now, verse 4, Jephthah really doesn't have a sly response like his dad did, and instead of persuading Ephraim to calm down and go home, Jephthah gathers against them for war, and they fight. And we learn at the end of the section here that 42,000 Ephraimites were killed. So the men of Israel have turned sword on one another. I had mentioned it before. We see a certain lack of unity in Israel in this book, but here they have gone to war against one another. Gilead strikes Ephraim. Verse 4 also includes the words of the Ephraimites, calling the Gileadites fugitives, that is, those who have run away. It's like they were to be part of Ephraim and they have left. They have fled. So they aren't, Ephraim is looking down upon them, right, as not worthy of the same inheritance, the same land as they have. The Gileadites instead are victorious in this fight. They capture the fords of the Jordan, the areas where the Ephraimites might seek to cross over. And so the Ephraimites, now stuck on the wrong side of the river trying to get home, they would find spots to cross, and the men of Gilead would test them. Are you an Ephraimite? To which they would lie and say, no, this is not good. You should never lie. Anyway, they say no, but the Gileadites had figured out a way to test if that statement was true or not. You may have noticed it before that different cultures that speak different languages have a lot of trouble speaking another person's language, right? Or even within one language, you can travel. So, for example, in the United States, if you go to the South, their accents are very different than they are if you go to New York or to the Northwest. Accents vary, and they don't say words the same. That's what Gilead is going to use as a test. They're going to use this word shibboleth in order to test the men of Ephraim to see if they're actually Ephraimites or not. If they can say it correctly, then they know that they're not from Ephraim. So even within Israel, there are these differences in their speech. For those of you who are curious, the word shibboleth is the Hebrew for basically a flowing stream of water. And so they're trying to cross water, so here's a related word, I guess. 42,000 dead. Jephthah judged Israel from 1088 to 1083, and then he was buried in his own city back in Gilead. Now, I mentioned it at the start. We then get three minor judges here. Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. They are the 9th, 10th, and 11th judges in the book, and they round out the rest of the minor judges. We only have one judge left, we will see tomorrow, Samson, who is the last of the major judges. Major-minor is not so much because of the person himself or what he did, as it is what's recorded in the scriptures of them, right? We have multiple chapters about Samson. We have 1 or 2 verses about some of the minor judges. That's the distinction. So Shamgar being that first minor judge, is that back in chapter 3 or chapter 4 there? Just like the minor and major prophets. It's not necessarily that Isaiah is a greater prophet than Micah was. It's just about the recordings that we received from the Lord from them. Isaiah is 66 chapters, right? Obadiah is 1. There's a lot of difference between what they have written. But Obadiah's call to go to Edom and call them to repentance for their sins against God's people is no less important than the call of Isaiah to go to God's people of Israel. So it's the same with the judges. These three men here are important in the history of God's people. We just don't know as much about them. So Ibzan is of Bethlehem. There's one for a family conversation. Why do you know this name, right? Why do you recognize Bethlehem, but you don't know Ibzan, so why do you know Bethlehem? Just gives you a chance to reflect on where our judge comes from, right? Jesus Christ, the true deliverer who delivers us from our sin and from death and from the devil. He was born in Bethlehem. So it's a good family conversation spot there. We have another example, as we've seen it with Gideon before, we see it again now, that Ibzan is going to have 30 sons, and Gideon had 70. So this great wealth of children, he has 30 sons and 30 daughters, so certainly had to be polygynous, that is, a husband with more than one wife. 60 children in a lifetime would, I don't think, be possible for a woman. I guess many, many multiples, but that would certainly be unique. Anyway, he gives the daughters in marriage outside of his clan. He brings in daughters for his sons, also from outside. That's not to say Israel, right? It's just his clan. That's not even necessarily the tribe, the 12 tribes of Israel. He may well have stayed within his tribe for this. 1083 to 1077 BC is the rough estimate for when he ruled as the judge over Israel. And then Elon, the Zebulunite, meaning he's from the tribe of Zebulun, 10 years, which would be 1077 to 1068 roughly. The study Bible here does make the note that Elon and Aijalon, so the name of the judge and the city in which he is buried, actually share the same consonants in Hebrew. Now, many of you aren't familiar with the Hebrew language. In Hebrew, actually the entire Old Testament, when it was first written down, was written only in consonants. So Hebrew distinguishes between consonants and vowels by putting the consonants basically on the line that you would write, and then the vowels are pointings and markings that go underneath or occasionally above the consonants themselves. So imagine writing out, you just try to write a sentence that way, right? Try to write out one English sentence by writing only the consonants on the line and then making the vowels underneath or above. That's the way Hebrew works. And so the Old Testament originally was just written as consonants, and it was an oral tradition that was handed down from one generation to the next that they memorized, and so they knew what those words were supposed to be and what they were supposed to sound like. But eventually, the Masoretes came in and they would add those vowel pointings, and that's what we know of today for our Old Testament from the Hebrew. And then what this is saying is that Elon and Aijalon, again, they share the same consonants. So in the original writing, when this was first written down, those two words would have looked the same. Perhaps that might even mean that one is named after the other. Verse 13, we then get the next one, Abdon as the 11th judge over Israel. He's going to be 8 years, that's 1068 to 1061, roughly, and he has 40 sons. 30 grandsons. That's a bit of an oddity, right? He has 40 sons himself, and his 40 sons together only produce 30 grandsons. It's like they quickly decided that children weren't worth having. That's a phenomenon that the American culture is living through. Not just America, really. A lot of the world is living through right now. And even when people move from locations that tend to have many children and they come to the United States, it only takes a generation before their birth rate ends up matching the birth rates of the people around them. That's how heavily influencing our culture and its ways seem to be. And that's sort of where we're at right now, where the number is shrinking to the point where we're not replacing what we had before. All right, so our final judge will come. We'll meet him tomorrow, chapter 13, the birth of Samson.